So the reason you're here today is elevating the role of sourcing and procurement. Now, you guys, if you know me, you know this is so near and dear to my heart. We're always looking to elevate the industry. So who could do it and who can tell you about it? Well, of course, we have to have two amazing sourcing leaders to present to you today. So first up, I want to tell you, I was so excited when they said Steve Kissinger was joining us. I know Steve back from his Nordstrom days. He's a veteran procurement leader with more than 40 years of firsthand experience, having served as the chief procurement officer for Nordstrom for 19 years. In addition to various leadership positions and also at Shell Oil Company, he serves now in an advisory role, helping early stage technology companies build business models that will resonate with the Fortune 1000 procurement leaders. So Steve, welcome. I'm so glad you joined us today.
Thanks, Dawn.
And with him is Sam Vale. Now, guys, if you don't know Sam, you need to get to know him. Not only is he personable, he's easy to get to know. He has a wealth of information available to you. He's the managing partner at LogicSource, and he's accountable for all the growth and profitability for the company's sourcing and procurement services-enabled technology line of business called One Market. Sam has over 25 years of global experience in senior leadership positions in professional services, private equity, and information technology businesses. So gentlemen, I am so excited to welcome you to the webinar today, the Power Hour. And how much more power could we have? Oh, sorry, I didn't get your picture up there. There's Sam. So folks, you cannot be eavesdropping on a better two conversationalists than these two today. So I'm going to take myself off camera. I'm going to ask everybody to open up their Q&A box. And if you need to find it, hover around the bottom of your screen and Q&A will pop up. And if you have any questions, type them in. I will interject with questions. And so gentlemen, if you see me come back on camera, it means I have something to say to you. And in the meantime, if we don't get to all of your questions, both of our presenters have said that they are happy to follow up with you after today's webinar is completed. So with that, I'm going to turn the Power Hour over to LogicSource.
Fantastic, Dawn. Thank you so much and welcome everybody. On behalf of everyone at LogicSource, we appreciate your attendance today. And what a better way to elevate the role of sourcing and procurement than to learn from one of the top CPOs of our time, Steve Kissinger. Steve, it's great to be with you again. I've had the pleasure of working with you and then knowing you personally, and most recently having joined our LogicSource Procurement Council. It's just been a wonderful experience. And I thought we would handpick you as a person that we would love to be able to share some real wisdom and tricks of the trade with regards to some key topics that are going on in the marketplace today. But you've been retired now for 2.5 years, and you've been doing a lot of advisory work. And as we were reading through some of your blogs, we came up with this theme of had I known then what I know now, perspectives from both the buy side and the sell side. And it's interesting because you've been working with a number of emerging technology companies as well as smaller growth companies. And I think the perspectives that you can share today are going to open the aperture in terms of how people can find inspiration and how they should think differently about their relationships with certain suppliers. So just as an opening, Steve, maybe give us a perspective on this whole theme of had I known then what I know now.
Sure. So, as you noted, Sam, I've been retired for a couple of years, and I had a very good friend of mine say you were pretty good in business, but you were lousy in retirement. Because after about a year, I got the itch to get back in. I really missed the action, and so just to give you a little context of what I'm going to share, I didn't really know what I wanted to do, but I needed to get back onto the procurement side, and so I decided to just start posting a blog on LinkedIn, as you noted. And I didn't really know what to expect, but I kind of found the power of LinkedIn and the platform. The first post I did, I had about 21,000 views. And that led to a lot of people reaching out to me. And I started to see a common theme that really caught me off guard. So this is kind of one of my, I wish I had known these things when I was in the CPO chair. And people were reaching out to me that were really innovative early stage tech companies. Some of them, in procurement technology, some in other areas, but they had a gap in knowing how to sell to the Fortune 1000 and how to build out their business model to do that. And so I've worked with a few companies over the last year, and I've noticed a gap. And there's a gap from a procurement leadership standpoint, how do you find these companies? Particularly the early stage ones. How do you find them? And get some competitive advantage from them. And for for these small innovative companies, it's how do you reach decision makers? And so I see that gap, and I've had a chance to work with a couple of companies pretty extensively over the last 6 months. So I'll give you a couple of examples to crystallize. One of them was a systems integrator. So, most folks on the tech side kind of think of SIs, systems integration is, a pretty established field. And but actually there's a company out there that I've been working with that has really broken the model, and they've done it really through technology. And so they've built a really lean organization, very, very low overhead, and they've built a model that is completely transparent from a pricing standpoint. And my role with them was to really help them build out that business model in a way that it would resonate with leadership and procurement, the things that they want to know, how they differentiate, and those kind of things. And so that was a real example to me. I watched them personally struggle with how do we go through the RFP process with a large company, extensive RFPs, 4 to 6 months cycle time, 60 to 90 days to get paid, challenges that it's really hard for them to overcome. And so one of my observations is I think we maybe as a profession miss out on finding some of these companies and engaging with them early because of the structure and rigor we have around the sourcing process. And, being a longtime procurement guy, I understand all the reasons why we have the process rigor that we have in the structure. But I guess my key takeaway was there's something that we might be missing in the profession. And then the second example I'll give you is a company called Fashion for Globe. And it's actually founded by someone who worked for Nordstrom through Infosys. And so, the founder is a technology person, but he got interested in fashion from his time at Nordstrom. And he has built a technology platform now that really addresses the entire supply chain from the design phase all the way through to the sale to the customer. And these are things that are out there today that are a little bit hard to find, but there's innovation out there that's a bit under the radar. And so, one of the things that I've really started to have a passion about is how do we make that process more efficient to connect, not the companies that have been around 5 to 7 years that people are starting to know about, but really more the early stage companies. How do we make that happen?
No, that's perfect. And we're going to talk more about that in terms of how do you commit the time, and then how do you focus that time with the right kind of groups and industries. So Steve, let's move into taking a look at our next topic, which is where and how you invest your time is more important now than ever, right? And as we were prepping for this, we came up with these 4 themes. Procurement technologies are constantly evolving, improving, and driving greater value and higher adoption. Then we talked about best practices in terms of how do you find the right skill sets? How do you identify the right ways in which you want to automate processes? How do you identify the way in which you get category expertise where it might be waning? How do you identify ways in which you get, even things like your spend analytics as highly accurate as well as actionable as possible? And then we're going to dive in a little bit on the innovation side and spend some time, talking about your experiences in how do you find those innovations. And then this emerging theme that we've heard from folks like Spend Matters, SIG, Procurement Foundry has really become the forefront of where procurement leadership is starting to devote more time. The ability to look at, track, and actually report the team's performance is growing more vital than ever. And we're going to spend some time there. But with the rate of change accelerating, Steve, in the procurement world, all these areas are key, but how do you see these factors playing a role in the leadership playbook for procurement leaders?
Well, I would say, Sam, you've picked probably the big 4 topics from my perspective. And, as a CPO, the time has never been better than right now to embrace all 4 of these. Clearly, we all know COVID has changed the rules in a lot of ways, and it's put the CPO front and center at the most senior leadership levels. So, CPOs have a huge job. They've always had a huge job, but it's even it's even more encompassing now because of these things. And, obviously, as you noted, procurement technology has just exploded in the last few years. And I don't have the exact statistics, but I had read a couple of months ago that roughly 75% of all the venture capital funding for procurement startups in technology has happened in the last 5 to 7 years. So clearly, if you follow where the money is, you can see why there's the explosion of technology that's out there that can do just about anything that you want. You've got, the standard procure to pay and source to pay technologies, and then you've got a lot of specialists out there as well. Best practices has clearly been on the radar a long time. There's a lot of more efficient access to that now than there used to be. Back in the day, benchmarking and identifying best practices was a pretty manual effort. You've got organizations like Dawn with SIG that have a lot of that available to the membership. And you can create, I guess one of the things I would add, you can create, it's important to follow best practices and find them. You can create your own as well. And I'll give you guys a small example of that. So one of the companies I'm working with right now, the CPO contacted me and just said, I would really like to rethink how we do training. And, in some ways, COVID has, initiated that thought process. But if we could start with a blank page, what would we do? How would we do that? And, for me, Dawn did a good job of talking about SIG University. That's clearly a great place that's well established and provides training. But from my perspective, there are lots of other ways now to get, market intelligence and insight and best practices through podcasts and webinars like this and other things. And so it's been an interesting process for me with this company, because if you really just start from scratch of how would we build this out today, then you can do things like align your training and your development to your business objectives. Find ways to make that training timely so that you can use it. And then, one of the things we're working on with this company is let's in essence spread out the way knowledge is gathered. And let's have the folks in our procurement team share that with the rest of the team. Not only share what they've learned, but share how we can apply it. So you take what you're learning through training and you align it to your business, and then you share it across your teams so that ultimately you actually use what you learn. So it's just, I just use it as a small example, but there are lots of ways, even if you're a company that isn't extremely mature on the procurement curve, if you will. Right. There are ways you can innovate and drive best practices. And then, as you said, performance management is really an up-and-coming thing that we'll talk about in a minute. But it's very important, particularly post-COVID, as CPOs and leaders have more attention on them.
Absolutely. And on the innovation front, things like, how does Bitcoin play a role in procurement? It's the topic that we're going to be talking about later today at our Logic Source Procurement Council meeting. But, the ideas that are floating around the marketplace today, it's just incredible. And if we can start to crystallize them and start to make them a part of a broader marketplace, I think we're going to see some vast improvements. So, Steve, again, I had the pleasure to work with you for a number of years, and your leadership was bar none, and you really just exuded the ability to empower your most valuable asset, and that was your team. And this was a quote that you gave us: you really have to care for and track all the value that your team delivers. So how do you think about value and empowering your team today? And how are we grading ourselves? Has that changed?
Yeah, it certainly has. I think that, there's an expansion today of what value is. I guess I'll say it that way. And, traditionally value has been around cost savings and those things, which are still very important. But now we're looking at sustainability, we're looking at innovation, we're looking at DEI measures and those kind of things. So for me, that's a good thing because it expands what procurement can bring to the table, and it expands the level of leadership that's interested in it. So, one of the things as far as the teams, but probably my favorite business quote is, people don't care what you know until they know that you care. And I think, setting that foundation with your organization is extremely critical, because once you know that you know them personally, that you want to help them advance their career, that you have flexibility around personal issues that they need to deal with, then you've got that foundation set to continue to drive value.
Yeah, yeah. And then Steve, in the past, could you share how you shared with leadership at Nordstrom's how your team was doing and kind of the great work that they were doing?
Yeah, we had, one example, we had a procurement executive committee, and it was made up of the CIO, the CFO, chief marketing officer, chief supply chain officer, chief HR officer. So that group met quarterly, and I led those meetings and ran those meetings. And it was a chance for us to share information, successes and information about what procurement was doing, an opportunity to share what was on our radar for the next 3 months. And in some cases, an opportunity to get their approval or their guidance on something that we were working on. And I found that to be a really good format to, it would be nice to have those conversations more often, but we all know how busy senior executives are. So just to have the discipline to do that quarterly was a real win.
That's great. And let's dive a little bit deeper into this idea about empowering your most valuable asset, and that's your sourcing team and procurement team. And we did a little bit of homework because we're very passionate about performance management, both from a pipeline, a project, and overall sourcing results performance. And when we stepped back and thought about it, you look at most other business functions within a company, whether it's sales, where they have Salesforce.com. FP&A has their planning tool called Anaplan. Human Resources has Workday to manage through all of their work. Legal tracks their time and their performance through time tracks. And Facilities has ServiceChannel. So every function we were thinking through, there was some form of automation to capture the rich work that was being done by that particular function. And so because we do over 4,000 sourcing events a year, we've got 88 category experts, we had to find a way to manage their performance and to help them and empower them with an ability to drive that. So from the perspective, Steve, of how you see performance management maturing, what are some of the important points that you'd like to make around how to make sure that we're not just capturing, savings, but we're also capturing all the other good work that's being done?
Yeah, so I would say, Sam, the procurement historically has been more transactional, and I think maybe that's why they're a little bit late to the table compared to Salesforce. I mean, clearly sales are important, and Salesforce filled a void there, and a lot of these other products have done the same thing. But procurement is at a point now where we have expanded the definition of value, and there's opportunity for us to share that value. And there's workflow topics. I kind of see a level of maturity here where you go from workflow is the beginning to sourcing. So think procure to pay and then source to pay. And then you start to get into project tracking and performance management. And I think that's the integration, and I think where the function is going.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're also seeing a focus on making sure the capture of results gets clearly communicated to the finance team, right? And I know we're going to talk about that in a little bit, but making sure that you've got one repository where all of the intake, all of the planned work, as well as all of the work in progress is being tracked. So at any given time, you have the ability to basically report out where we are against plan. And again, each one of these other business functions has a plan that they need to live up to, and they track against that plan. So we found it very interesting in terms of, how do you formally measure this? And, maybe just a couple of thoughts on how you build credibility through measuring the team's performance.
Yeah, so you have to, to me, there are steps. You have to define what value is, first of all. And once you've defined what those elements of value are, then you have to define how do we measure that? What does that mean to us? And once you've done that, you have to figure out how do we track it? And then you have to figure out how do we share it with senior leadership so that we can continue to build credibility. So, I think of those as stages along the way. And the combination of technology that's out there now and the focus on procurement and the opportunity to expand the definition of value makes this a really prime time for CPOs to focus on this.
Yeah, absolutely. And in fact, we we use a tool called Portfolio, but the idea was not just capture cost savings, but capture the actual work that's being done. Many times, our category experts are asked to work on a cost avoidance project or potentially an innovation project. We had one financial firm that asked us to go source a credit card, which was a new revenue generator for them, but they had never ventured down that path before. So our team had to do the research, do the RFI, then do the RFP to get to that point. And that's very valuable work that it's not cost savings related, right? So I think the maturity of leadership understanding all the good work that's getting done and capturing that, and then being able to put some form of value on it, we believe is incredibly important.
Hey, Sam, can I ask you just to pause for a second? Can you go back to the leadership slide? There's one other topic I wanted to cover there that I thought might be helpful. So one of the things that one of the ways I looked at leadership when I was there, it's such a broad topic and such an important topic and such a complex topic. And so I tend to try to build frameworks about how you think about something like that. And so we came up with something called, if you want to use an acronym, ACE. So that, the A is alignment, the B is a culture of curiosity, and the E is enablement. And for me, it was a good way in the CPO chair to think about how do we advance this? So if you go back to the foundation of building credibility with your team, establishing trust, the alignment is building alignment, with primarily with your senior leadership. I mean, that's a critical step, but you also have to build alignment with the functional leaders that your category managers are dealing with. And again, we use the Procurement Executive Council as one way to do that. The other thing we did at Nordstrom, and I know other companies have similar things, but it was very helpful. So, twice a year, there were, 2-day offsite meetings for the top 100 leaders of the company, where we took really deep dives into the business, where we'd been, where we're headed. And then Nordstrom also had a monthly 1-hour update session in person if you were in Seattle, or, through Zoom, again, to cover progress against critical goals and next steps. So for me as a CPO, I had a pipeline of information coming in about the key priorities of the company, the challenges we're facing, the areas of focus. So getting that alignment with the team was very important. And that's the alignment topic. The culture of curiosity, it's easy to kind of get stale with things. And there are a lot of things you can do to build that culture so that people are constantly learning. I mean, I like to bring in subject matter experts to come in and work with us for some period of time on projects. We did that with you guys, with Logic Source. And, part of the benefit of that was learning from subject matter experts in categories, getting different perspective on the technology that's out there and how we can use that. I was a proponent of bringing folks in from other functional areas into procurement, because I wanted them, to really understand procurement so they could go back in their organization after a few years and be advocates for the procurement function, but they also brought a skill set that we needed and credibility. So we did that, for example, in the HR area, where we brought in an HR leader to manage that particular category. We brought in someone from the technology side, from enterprise architecture, from the EA group. And, I had worked with her on a project that she had supporting procurement, and she had really deep change management expertise and process expertise. And those were things that, you may not traditionally think about in procurement, but a lot of the things we do involve process and they involve change management. And so that was what was an external resource that came in to help us grow. Obviously another way is hiring people from the outside. So for me, the second pillar of this was really how do you create that culture, and how do you continue to be curious, and how do you continue to develop that? And then the third piece is the enablement piece, which is helping your staff as a CPO be more efficient, whether that's through technology investment, procure to pay, source to pay, but also how do you help them with obstacles and roadblocks that we all have. And so for me, if you can, the alignment piece is we've got our team working on the right stuff, which is important. The curiosity piece is we're constantly churning the organization to bring in new ideas and new ways of doing things. And then the enablement piece is there will inevitably be things that get in the way. So how do you have a direct focus on how you can remove those obstacles so that you can continue to make progress? So I appreciate you going back. I just wanted to share a couple more thoughts on that topic.
Yeah, that's great. And Dawn, you popped in.
I did. So that means that I have a question from the audience. And
Great.
Steve, anytime someone says natural curiosity, it gets me so excited because that is so important for people to be curious about the entire world and what's going on. And we preach that so much. Read a newspaper every single day, know what's going on in the world around you, be naturally curious. And then once you start, you get addicted to it. So, but that wasn't the question. The question for you, Steve,
I agree with you, by the way.
So the question is, how we have a person that's attending, and she has said, so how can you help me communicate to executive management about your performance management in a way they even care about? Saying, see, we worked really hard, sounds like you get a response, and so what? All I want to know is what you delivered, i.e. savings. So how do you steer that conversation away?
I think it, part of it depends on who the audience is. So clearly, if you're dealing with your CFO, that is what they care about. And, in a couple of slides later, we're going to take a little bit of a deep dive on that topic specifically. I have some thoughts on that. If you're adding value and measuring for diversity, equity, and inclusion, most senior executives care about that. That's a topic that's on their radar. Obviously, sustainability, environmental performance, those kind of things are critical to people. So the reason I think it's a game changer for procurement to move past cost savings is because it opens the aperture, to use Sam's term, it opens the aperture to other senior leaders that are going to care about what you're doing.
Yeah.
And being able to measure that and share it through a forum like I had with the Procurement Executive Council is how you keep it fresh.
Yeah, and the other one I would add to that is mitigating risk. That we can cause risk events or we can mitigate risk events as sourcing professionals. And the more we can help mitigate those, I think we need to be screening those from the rooftops, especially with regard to cyber and all the other issues going on right now.
Yeah, and that's a great call out, Dawn. I didn't think to mention it, but you're absolutely right. That's become much more critical over the last few years.
Yeah. Okay.
Dawn,
I'll go
I
back to
think-
the camera. Go ahead.
I'll just add, I think a perspective here is leverage data, right? If you have clean, accurate, and actionable spend data that's showing trends over time, and you start including enrichments like Steve said, like supplier diversity, supplier risk, and you start to demonstrate how you had to make changes or make decisions based upon what that data is telling you. I think a lot of folks will appreciate that, especially coming out of COVID, where we were asked to change payment terms, we were asked to switch suppliers because some were in peril. So just a whole bunch of things, but rely on your data because that's where the source of truth really comes from. And if you can get good, clean data every month, you're going to be armed with those answers.
No, amen to that. So you also brought up another point. We are going to be launching a data science 101 curriculum next year, just for that reason. People need to understand how to analyze this data. So thank you for bringing that up.
Great.
Okay.
Yeah, that's good. And Sam, you've made me think of something else. I mean, another topic that is an expansion of procurement capability from my perspective is demand management. So, what I used to always tell our CFO is, we can run sourcing events and we'll save, 5 to 15% or whatever we do, depending on the market. But we can also just not buy something. We can spend less on something, or we can just not buy it, and then we save 100%. Yep. And you have to have the data. You have to have the granularity of data to be able to identify where those opportunities are and look across. In the case of Nordstrom retail stores, you've got a broad store footprint, and the way things are bought, the way indirect goods and services are bought can differ across those stores. And once you have data where you can start to normalize that and get a picture of who's really efficient and who's not, then you can start to educate the organization about that. And you create that awareness, and then people start to pay attention to it. So that is also a big topic, and data is the foundation for us.
Yeah, we've had a number of clients ask us for help just to put in place a control tower, right? So watching particular spend areas on a vigilant basis to see what's happening and then calling out the anomalies and go and investigate it, right? So that's a great point on demand management. So Steve, let's shift gears a little bit, because one of the professional aspirations that I most respect about you was the commitment to finding the time to build a network that led to sources of inspiration for you, and how you learned from those inspirational avenues to really build out some of the ideas that you brought to companies like Shell and Nordstrom. Could you describe for me how you really kind of built this network and this framework on where to find the innovation?
Yeah, so I would say that the way I would answer, Sam, the small emerging growth suppliers, I would say when I was in the CPO chair, I wasn't nearly as good at that as I wish I would have been. Kind of back to my comments earlier, I didn't view that as it wasn't on my radar. Let me put it that way. And it would start to be on my radar once a company hit a certain level and they had a marketing budget and you started to hear about them, but really not the emerging companies that I think are the next step for us as a profession. So that's one of those I learned later. I wish I had known. So that's what I would say about that topic. The other thing that I've learned is there's a richness in these venture capital firms, and there's a firm that I'm actually working with called Plug and Play. Maybe some people that are listening are aware of them. They're a Silicon Valley firm, but they do a good job of finding and helping develop early stage companies, not just in procurement, but across the business. And so they are always looking for people to come in and provide some advisory services and expertise to the early stage companies that they're working with. And in some cases they fund them, in some cases they don't. But they have a supply chain practice. And so, that's a place where you can get access. And one of the services that they offer to their clients is you bring them a business problem and they'll find you an early stage company, an emerging tech company to help solve that problem.
Interesting.
So they play the role of connectors. Yeah. And for me, again, it's another way, these companies that aren't at the 5 to 8 year maturity curve, but they're relatively new. And I'm just using them as an example because I'm familiar with them. Early stage companies can come in, they can get connected with Plug and Play. They run 2 boot camps a year, 3 months each. These companies get all kinds of input on how to build out their business model. And then, they have connections to help get to customers and their customer base. So it's not one that I think most CPOs think about, but it's an avenue that's out there. And the other company that I followed is called Digital Procurement World. And they're based in Germany. And as the name would say, they're all about digital. But they've built a kind of a subsidiary that does the same thing in a way as Plug and Play. They don't do investments in companies, but they have corporations come to them and identify problems they have specific to procurement mostly, and they find early stage companies to help solve those problems. So that's a path that's out there that in my experience, didn't really exist until the last couple of 3 years, or at least people didn't know about it. So I see that as a good opportunity to find inspiration and find new sources. Key networking we've talked about. SIG. Go ahead.
Quick comment, because I did work for a VC for about 7 years, and the win-win here is that if you're managing a small startup and you want to get acceleration, there's nothing better than aligning with a big brand. And so we would spend time calling on corporations. Some of them even had corporate venture groups where they had people purpose-built to go out and look for the technology or the idea that could really catapult a new business idea that they had. So don't be afraid to check in with any of the folks that may be working on business development in your firm, and see if they're actively contacting some of the VCs to generate that kind of interest, because it's a very exciting time to be able to get into that network and really start to expand your horizon there.
Right. Good call out. Yeah, and the networking groups and the industry influencers, there are a lot of them out there. I think the main thing is to be focused on finding them and find the ones that are generating value for you as a CPO. And as Dawn did in the introduction, there's a lot of services that SIG provides around networking and conferences and podcasts, webinars, and those kind of things. And you can find industry influencers the same way. I think the CPO network is doing a better job than in the past of connecting with each other. I'll say that as well. And what we do through the Logic Source Procurement Council is an example of that, right? We've got a group of CPOs. We share information, we share lessons learned, we share what we see in the future. amongst ourselves, but then we share it within our own networks as well. And, for me, the thing is, you can get access to all this information really easily. And I think this is a key point. There's always this balance of what value am I going to get and how much time am I going to have to invest to get it? And that question gets managed and asked every day in the mind of a CPO because there's a lot to do. But my takeaway from getting a lot more involved in this is it's out there, and you go follow these people. Go on LinkedIn, follow them, look at what blogs they post, get connected with the things they're doing, and you can just get a steady stream of information that's out there. And it's not hard to get, and it doesn't take a long time to absorb it and understand it and figure out how to use it. So, back to kind of the original theme of had I known then what I know now, I would have gone. I did these things, but I would have gone more aggressive on it. As that market matured and there was access to more information.
No, great points. Great points. So let's head into probably one of the most debated topics, and that's how do you build the right relationship between procurement and finance? We know it's critical, and yet seemingly at times we fall on the sword and just don't understand how to do it properly. And we highlighted some key elements in a successful relationship with finance here, but would love your perspectives on, again, all the learnings that you've had and kind of key initiatives that you put in place to ensure that you are communicating and speaking the same language as finance.
Right. So for me, you'll see the first thing there, CPO reports to finance. Over my time as a CPO, I reported to finance about half of the time to the CFO, and about half of the time to a role called the CAO, which was the Chief Administrative Officer. They both reported to the CEO, so they were senior level roles. There were benefits to each of those. The CAO role had responsibility for technology and for store design and construction and for risk management and all these other groups. So being connected into that was critical for the customers that we supported. So there was benefit to that. My personal preference is reporting to the CFO is the best because, as you said, that getting that alignment and building that credibility is really important. And there's a huge level of maturity difference in procurement organizations, and those that have really become more advanced now have the language of the CFO and they understand how to translate it. The CFO understands it; they see it as being credible. But that's a huge step. And, I look back at, a few years back, I'll say, probably 10 years back for me, and the way we reported savings and the process we went through to ensure finance thought it was credible and to go through the numbers. It was painstaking. And at the end of the day, it really didn't drive any value for the business. And, I look back at it now, and it's almost embarrassing. It was an exercise we went through because we needed to report value. In those days, we didn't take money out of the budget. So we didn't really affect the P&L. Customers just spent it somewhere else, internal business partners. So, that's the way it was. Now, for me, getting connected directly to the CFO, and now you have access to FP&A and the budget process and all these other organizations. And that's once you understand what they're looking for and they understand what you can do from a procurement standpoint, it really changes things. And the second item, FP&A resources partner within procurement. One of the things that we did, so this was we probably started this about 5 years ago, I would say. We embedded part-time FP&A resources into the procurement function. So they reported to FP&A. They had a dotted line to me. They actually sat in our procurement function. They were with our folks. They attended our staff meetings. Procurement learned what they were working on from an FP&A perspective. The FP&A teams learned what procurement was working on. And so we really bridged that credibility gap both ways because it exists both ways. And then we were able to engage through FP&A in some of the things we were talking about earlier when we were talking about performance management. Right. What is it that where are the savings? How do we quantify them? How do they reflect in the budget? When do we take them out? When do we cut over and take them out of the budget? Those are critical things that move you from just we report savings to we report savings and we take them out of the budget. So we actually hit the P&L. And then ultimately, how do you efficiently track that and report that so that you not only can do the cutover and actually reduce expense for your company, but you can also share with your leadership what you're doing.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, for us as a managed service provider, that type of access for the FP&A team is critical. On a weekly basis, we're measuring by project. Where are we? When do we expect savings to hit? What's the cutover date? What's the budget to actual look like? So that now we're giving sign-ons to the FP&A team so they can track the sourcing progress, right? Because we're trying to be much more proactive in saying, let's not wait until that monthly meeting when we have to sit down and kind of grind through the numbers. Rather, be monitoring with us where we are and stay in tune and participate with us. If we need help, we might be calling upon you for some assistance. But collaborating with them and then giving them the data, we have found has made enormous strides in improving that relationship.
Yeah, I mean, we touch on it, Sam, and I think back to our experience, and you had resources embedded within the procurement organization at Nordstrom, and we worked together, and your resources worked really closely with finance, and we had the right ideas of what to do, and the right vision of what to do, and the desire to do it well, and I think we made good progress compared to others, but it was very manual and just a lot of time wasted on all sides with procurement folks, with FP&A folks, with the Logic Source team. And again, we made progress, but the technology has advanced so much and, through the portfolio product that is much, much more streamlined. And that's not an insignificant thing. That's a really big deal because we talk about enablement. That enables you to make things happen in a timely basis and to share your results in a timely basis.
Yeah.
Don't want to underestimate that.
Last comment I'll make is on the far bottom right there, the accurate and trustworthy spend data. To be able to speak finance, you got to make your spend data correlate to what finance is looking for. So GL coding, ensuring that you've got the proper department numbers, things of that nature become really important to them. And this way, you don't have to go and translate, right? Because they're going to say, well, who's buying that and what department budget is it hitting? Versus now going in with reports that are aligned and organized by the way finance looks at the numbers versus, just pure spend. So Dawn, you pop back in, you must have a question.
I do. And so Steve, working in the fashion industry, I know that supply and demand changes all the time based on the latest trends and what's currently in fashion. How were you able to make decisions in procurement to increase sales?
So I wish I could give you a good answer on that. My role at Nordstrom was on the indirect spend side. So I didn't have, if the question is directly about fashion, I can't add any value there. I wish I could, but I wasn't on that side of the house. Good question.
So, but you did say that it's so much more than savings. So did you have new ideas you were able to bring to the table for other parts of the organization, things like that weren't just savings?
Yeah, I mean, for us, we measured diversity at the time, really before DE&I, and we measured sustainability, around our packaging and paper consumption and water consumption and all those kind of things. So we definitely embrace those.
Good. Thank you.
Super. So Steve, just in cleaning up, any last minute thoughts for the group in terms of, these 5 key takeaways? I think you've done a great job in sharing and giving us very specific ideas that we could follow up on. But any closing comments on your part?
I think, Sam, just to kind of put a bow on it, I mean, we touched on the emerging technology and easy ways that CPOs and leaders can go tap into that and understand who's out there. I think that's a key takeaway from the conversation, hopefully for folks. The leadership conversation, using the ACE method, if using my terminology, having that framework is critical and all that involves. And then obviously, the interaction with finance, from my perspective, is much simpler if you're reporting into the finance organization. I mean, I didn't say it before, but I know a lot of folks don't report into finance. They don't report into the CFO. It makes it a lot harder. It's not impossible, obviously. When you're sitting in staff meetings, with your CFO every week and you're in front of them every week, it just gets a lot simpler.
That's great. Well, listen, thank you so much, Steve. It's been a pleasure. Dawn, thank you for hosting.
No, I have a few more questions. You guys,
okay.
You off. You see? Yeah, no, you can't leave. So, Steve, it's a two-part question, but it says, what was the procurement technology landscape and adoption like when you started your career? And the follow-on to that is, what task, action, responsibility with technology advancement has benefited the most for you? So tell me, when you started, what was technology like?
Yeah, so it was pretty rudimentary, right? And you typically were, if you're a big company, there were limited choices. The marketplace has exploded with different options now. And I just got off a call with a company that's going to be exploring the whole new P2P platform and, the process that they're going to go through. So I think, to answer your question directly, in the beginning, there was an attempt to do kind of more of the all-inclusive, buy an ERP system and then offshoots of that. And Steve, you could probably add to this better than I can. And then all of a sudden, the best of breeds came in and contracts management, new sourcing tools arrived. And now I think, the consumer has a lot of different choices, and they really need to decide, do I need all the complexity that the big tools have? Do I need to spend that much money? Do I have the right team to support this? And most importantly, who's going to take care of the data, right? Time and time again, and we did a survey with you at the beginning of the year, 77% of the respondents said they have fair to moderate adoption of their existing technologies. And the surprising truth is, it's because the data is not good. Mm-hmm. Whether it's contracts data, project data, pricing data, you name it. And that's, our mission in life is to improve our clients' data in all facets of source to pay, so that those tools are used and there's a great return on the investment.
Perfect. So Steve, when you started, how was it?
I started so long ago that my first job as a buyer was buying desktop PCs. So you're dating me here of how long I've been around. But I think the progression followed what Sam was talking about. That it started out with the ERP systems, big huge expense, cumbersome, certainly better than nothing. Moved into P2P, then source to pay, and now you've got all the best of breed solutions. So it's been an evolution. I would say, foundationally, that when we moved into procure to pay, it was a big milestone because it just streamlined so many things, and that was a big thing. I would say, now in the current environment, really the data is the place, and having the spend analytics and the ability to understand that is what drives the most value from my experience. Once you have the foundational elements in place.
Well, good. So folks, we did post a copy of today's slide deck. It's in the chat. We will also be sending it to you tomorrow with a link to the recording. But if you want to download the slides directly to your hard drive, you can go ahead and do that from the chat. And Steve, I always like to ask people this question because, and the answers vary, but if you could talk to your younger procurement self, is there any advice that you would have given yourself, maybe, let's say 20, 30 years ago, that you wish you had known?
Yeah, as I reflect back on, I think I was definitely curious, back to our earlier topic, and I just spent a lot of time reading and studying and trying to learn. I would say the gap, that if I were going to go back, the thing I missed was just asking the simple question, why? Because it's one thing to, to study best practices and learn what's out there. It's another thing in the day-to-day to really drill down on topics and, ask why. Why do we do it this way? Why don't we do it this way? What if we did it a different way? And I would say I didn't make a concerted effort to do that. And I believe I missed a lot of things by it's so simple, but just ask. And, I had a 40-year career. If I would have asked why 40,000 times, 1,000 times a year, I would guess I would have learned some things and done some things differently and better. So it's very simple, but that would be the thing I would say.
And what about you, Sam?
Oh boy. I think I would have really made an attempt to get on the side of Steve's side of the table and had more empathy for what goes on. You know, having done this now for 12 years and acting as the procurement department for a large number of our clients, you can see the trials and tribulations that the practitioner goes through. And to change work process, to change automation, it's a big deal. And so I think it's the empathy thing and going in knowing that this is going to cause a little bit of heartache and being prepared for that and being able to manage it elegantly with them.
Good. And then we have time for one last question. Can you help us by adding some detail on how to measure value in risk? How do I measure the value in flexibility, et cetera? Or where can I find best practices on that?
I mean, for me, Dawn, the risk topic, there are a lot of software as a service products out there that cover all kinds of topics, whether it's supply chain availability risk, cyber risk. Obviously, you guys at SIG, that's key focus for you. That would be the place where I would go to try to get my inspiration and what's available and how to integrate it. And even before you invest in some of those products, you can ask questions, right? Go find the companies that are leading out there. Ask them, share with them the struggles and the challenges you're having, what things you care about. Have them educate you so that you can make a decision about where you need to invest and where you need to put focus.
Yeah, and our third-party risk management certification goes deep into how to value risk and risk mitigation. So that is a place that, thank you for mentioning.
Perfect. And I'll just plug one of our LPC members who he does that as a day job. He goes in and manages a company's program around risk and helps them set it up. So if there's any interest there, just let us know.
Good. So we are going to be sending out the contact information for our presenters to everybody in the follow-up email. So please keep the conversation going. Steve, thank you. It's been so great to spend some time with you again. You need to be coming to the summit. We're going to have over 25 technology booths at the summit. So I want you in there and meeting some of the startups that we're going to get to showcase. And Sam, I'm sure I'm going to see you at the upcoming summit, right?
You got it.
Good. So you can also keep the conversation going, everybody, by coming to the summit, looking for Sam, having a conversation, reaching out on LinkedIn, but make sure that you add both of these incredible gentlemen to your portfolio of people you need to know in sourcing. And with that, we are going to wrap up today's Power Hour, and stay tuned because we are going to have many, many more coming to you in the next few weeks. So with that, thank you so much to LogicSource for hosting us today.
Yeah. Thank you, Dawn. Thank you, Steve.
Thank you.
It's been great. Thank you both.
Stay safe and healthy wherever you are, and hopefully we'll see you in person very soon. Have a great day. Bye-bye.